Spring sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Boston law office, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany desk. Jackson Ashford III sat in the leather chair, his 68 years evident in the silver of his hair, but not in the sharpness of his eyes. Before him sat three young people, his grandchildren, waiting with the peculiar mixture of grief and anticipation that follows the reading of a will. James, 25, sat straight-backed in his tailored suit. Emma Grace, 22, twisted her handkerchief between nervous fingers. Daniel, 19, slouched slightly, trying to hide his curiosity behind practiced indifference. The lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, adjusted his spectacles. The late Mr. Jackson Ashford II has left the entirety of Haven Ranch in Wyoming Territory to the three of you jointly. The property is valued at approximately $500,000. However, there is a condition. James leaned forward. What kind of condition? The old man rose slowly from his chair and walked to the window. Boston Harbor stretched beyond, ships moving like toys across the gray water. Before any of you can claim your inheritance, I must tell you a story. The story of how Haven Ranch came to be. The story of the woman who taught me to live again. The story of a little girl who saved my soul on the coldest night I have ever known. He turned to face them. It was the winter of 1886. I was 34 years old, and I was dead inside. The office seemed to fade, and Jackson's voice carried them backward through time. Let me tell you about the night a child knocked on my door. Wyoming Territory, January 1886. The wind howled across the frozen landscape like the cry of something dying. Snow fell so thick that the world became nothing but white chaos, erasing landmarks, swallowing sound, turning the Wyoming wilderness into a vast blank page where a man could lose himself forever. Through that white void, a figure moved. Small, impossibly small for such conditions. Lily Rose Mitchell was 3 years old, nearly 4. Her brown curls hung limp against her flushed cheeks, stiff with ice. The woolen sweater her mother had knit clung to her thin frame, soaked through. Her boots, lined with rabbit fur and carefully patched, were torn now, letting in the killing cold. In her arms she clutched Rosie, a straw doll tied with a faded red ribbon. The doll had been a gift from her grandmother, the last thing the old woman had made before the fever took her. Lily held Rosie like a talisman, like proof that love existed somewhere in this frozen hell. Mommy. The word came out cracked, barely audible, but Lily said it again and again. Each repetition a prayer, a promise, a reason to keep going. Mommy, Mommy. In the snow before her were footprints, adult-sized, a woman's boots, her mother's tracks laid down hours ago when the storm had been gentle. Now they were fading, swallowed by falling snow. Lily remembered her mother that morning, bundling up in her blue coat. I'll be back before supper, sweetheart. You're a big girl. Keep the fire going like Mommy taught you. Her mother had kissed her forehead. I'm going to Mrs. Henderson's place to get medicine for that cough of yours. Maybe I'll bring back peppermint candy if you've been very good. I'll be good, Mommy, I promise. But Mommy had not come back. The sun had set, the storm had grown fierce, and Lily, sitting by the cabin window with Rosie in her lap, had watched until she could no longer tell white snow from white sky. Then she had made her decision with the simple clarity children possess. Mommy needed help, so Lily would find her. Now those footprints led her forward until they simply stopped, swallowed by the storm. Lily turned in a circle. Mommy, Mommy! The wind threw her voice back, mocking. She was utterly alone. Ahead, through the swirling white, she saw something flat and smooth stretching between dark trees. A frozen stream. She had crossed it before with her mother in warmer times. Now it looked like a path forward. Lily stepped onto the ice. For 3 steps, it held. On the 4th, she heard the sound. A low groan, like the earth sighing. She stopped, suddenly afraid. The ice beneath her boots turned from white-gray to black. Lines appeared, spreading like cracks in glass. Then, it gave way. The world became cold beyond imagining. Not the cold of wind or snow, but a cold that reached inside and tried to drag everything warm into darkness. Lily screamed, flailing, and her small hand closed around something. A branch. Thin, brittle, but there. She pulled with every ounce of strength her small body possessed. Inch by desperate inch, she dragged herself from the black water onto solid ice, onto the snowbank beyond. She lay there shaking, unable to move or think. Blood dripped from her palm where the branch had cut deep. She stared at it, then brought Rosie close and kissed the doll's head. "I keep going," she whispered. "I find Mommy." She stood. Her legs trembled. Her wet clothes were already freezing. But she walked. Darkness descended. Full night, and with it a cold so complete it felt like the absence of everything warm. Lily's steps became slower. Her vision blurred. She leaned against trees to stay upright. She was going to sleep. The thought came with strange comfort. Then she saw it, far off through the trees. A light, golden and flickering, a window. Lily did not remember deciding to move toward it. She simply found herself walking, drawn to that light like a soul to salvation. The wind screamed at her to stop, but the light pulled her forward. The ranch house emerged from the storm. Weathered wood, smoke rising from the chimney, the warm glow of firelight. Lily stumbled to the door and knocked. Once. No answer. Again, harder. The door opened. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, silhouetted against firelight. He wore a leather coat and a wide-brimmed hat. His beard was frosted with ice. His eyes, deep-set and shadowed, looked down at her with an expression that might have been shock. Lily looked up at him. Her lips moved. "Sir, my mom didn't come home last night." Then her knees gave way. Rosie slipped from her frozen fingers, and Lily Rose Mitchell collapsed into the snow at the stranger's feet. The last thing she felt were strong arms catching her. The last thing she heard was a man's voice, rough but somehow gentle, saying words she could not understand. Then darkness took her, merciful and complete. 4 hours earlier, Jackson Ashford sat alone in his ranch house trying to remember what it felt like to care about living. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows across the simple room. The cabin was small, just 2 bedrooms, a main room, and a kitchen. Books lined one wall, the only luxury Jackson allowed himself. Medical texts, philosophy, technical manuals, and poetry, though he rarely read it anymore because poetry reminded him of Emma. He held a glass of whiskey in his right hand and a letter in his left. The paper was old now, yellowed at the edges, the ink fading. But he knew every word by heart. "Dearest Jack, Grace asks for you every night. She made you a drawing today. It is of our family, all 3 of us holding hands. She says when you come home, we will be just like the picture. Please come home soon. All my love, Emma." Emma had written this 2 weeks before she died. 2 weeks before the Stamford Bridge collapsed and sent her train into the frozen river. 2 weeks before Jackson's world ended. He set the letter down beside other relics, a daguerreotype of Emma and Grace, Grace's teddy bear recovered from the accident, a pocket watch from his father, and a document Jackson kept as evidence of his crime, a maintenance report for the Stamford Bridge, dated October 1882, recommending immediate closure and repair. Jackson had signed the order to postpone that maintenance. He and the other board members had decided 3 months would not matter. That money saved would make the merger more attractive. They had been wrong. December 23, 1882. The Boston to Philadelphia Express, train number 847, had crossed the Stamford Bridge during the worst snowstorm of the decade. The weight had been too much for compromised supports. The bridge collapsed. 43 people died in the freezing water, among them Emma and Grace. The investigation had been damning. Negligence, wrongful death. Jackson had settled every lawsuit immediately. $50,000 per family, over $2 million, more than half his fortune. But no amount of money could buy back Emma and Grace. So he had done the only thing that made sense. He walked away from everything. He sold his railroad shares, divided his remaining fortune, half to Emma's family, a quarter to charitable foundations. The rest he kept out of cold practicality. A man had to live on something, even a man who did not particularly want to live. With $50,000, he had come west. Wyoming Territory, land so remote a man could lose himself in its vastness. He purchased 2,000 acres from the territorial government land, deed number 847. Even in trying to forget, he could not escape reminders. Then he built this cabin with his own hands, 24 feet by 32 feet, Log construction with dovetail joints learned from a German carpenter. Every splinter, every blister, every frozen morning had been part of his penance. He did not deserve comfort. The barn came next, 40 by 60 feet, 12 stalls. He dug the well himself, 60 feet down, hitting groundwater at 47. The physical labor had been brutal, but that was the point. Pain was proof he was still alive when he should have been the one in that river. Now, 4 years later, he had a working ranch, 6 horses, a dozen cattle, chickens, a garden. He was self-sufficient and alone, which was all he wanted. He still had money, $300,000 in Boston bank accounts. The interest alone generated over $10,000 yearly, but he did not touch it. Money was why Emma and Grace were dead. Jackson stood and walked to the window. The storm was intensifying. Snow fell thick and fast, the kind that could kill in hours. He should check the horses, but found it hard to care enough to move. This was his life now, this endless winter, internal and external. This slow drift into living death, where days blurred together and clarity came only from whiskey, old letters, and crushing memory. The knock at the door was so unexpected he thought he imagined it. But it came again, louder, insistent. Jackson grabbed the rifle beside the door and opened it cautiously. No one lived within 10 miles. His nearest neighbor, old Pete, only visited when necessary. He looked down. A child stood there, a little girl soaked through, shivering violently. Her lips were blue. Her eyes seemed to look through him rather than at him. "Sir," she whispered, "my mom didn't come home last night." Then she fell. Jackson dropped the rifle and caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing. Her skin was ice against his hands. No child should be this cold and still be alive. He did not think. He carried the girl to the hearth and laid her on the thick rug. Her clothes were frozen stiff. He stripped them off carefully, checking for injuries. No broken bones, but her feet were white and waxy. Early frostbite. Her fingers, too. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then stoked the fire higher. The room temperature needed to rise gradually. Too much heat too fast would shock her system. A doll lay by the door. Jackson retrieved it and tucked it under the blankets with the child. She stirred slightly but did not wake. Jackson knelt and pressed 2 fingers to her neck. A pulse. Weak and fast, but there. He lifted one eyelid. Pupil response sluggish but present. He had read about hypothermia in his medical text. The body's core temperature dropped. Organs began shutting down. But if warming was gradual and careful, there was hope. Jackson started water heating. He mixed tea from dried herbs, chamomile for calming, willow bark for pain, honey for energy. The tea old Pete had taught him to make. While the water heated, he examined the child more carefully. Perhaps 3 or 4 years old. Well-fed, not malnourished. Someone had cared for her. The clothes were well made, the boots carefully patched. This was a loved child. In the pocket of her coat, he found 2 things. The first was a handkerchief embroidered with a name in blue thread, Sarah Mitchell. The second was a piece of paper folded until nearly falling apart, a land deed. It listed property at Pine Creek, about 8 miles south. The owner line read, Sarah Mitchell, in careful script, but there were no witness signatures, no official seal. This deed was not legally valid. Jackson stared at the paper. He knew the cabin at Pine Creek. He had ridden past it a dozen times, always seeing smoke but never anyone. He had assumed it was another hermit seeking isolation. Now he knew. A woman named Sarah Mitchell lived there illegally, squatting on territorial land with forged papers. And she had a daughter. This daughter, who now lay unconscious on his floor. "Where is she?" Jackson asked the sleeping child. "Where's your mother?" He already knew he would be looking for Sarah Mitchell as soon as the storm broke. Not because he was a good man. He had stopped believing that 4 years ago. But because this child had asked for help, and Jackson knew what it meant to fail someone who needed you. He would not fail again. The night stretched long. Jackson sat beside the child, keeping watch. Every hour he checked her pulse, breathing, temperature. He changed blankets when they became damp. He kept the fire stoked precisely. He did not sleep. Past midnight, the child stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused. "Mommy?" "She's not here, sweetheart, But we're going to find her. What's your name? Lily. Her voice was barely a whisper. Lily Rose Mitchell. Lily, that's a beautiful name. I'm Jack. You're safe now. Mommy went to get medicine for my cough. She didn't come back. Did I do wrong? No, sweetheart, you did exactly right. You were very brave. Where did your mother go? The place with Mrs. Henderson. Pine Creek, I think. Pine Creek Settlement. Jackson knew it. 15 miles southeast, 30 miles round trip. In this storm, it would be a death march. When did she leave, Lily? Before lunch. She said she'd be back for supper. That was 10 hours ago, maybe 12. In this storm, a person could survive perhaps 4 hours before hypothermia became fatal. Less if injured or lost. Sarah Mitchell was almost certainly dead. But Jackson had learned something about death in 4 years. You kept looking anyway. You did not give up even when hope was gone, because not trying was worse than failing. Lily, I need you to drink this. He held the cup of warm tea to her lips. She took a small sip, then another. Good girl. Now rest here by the fire. When the storm stops, we're going to find your mother. I promise. It was a promise he had no business making, but it was what the child needed to hear. Lily's eyes drifted closed. This time her breathing was deeper, more regular. Sleep rather than unconsciousness. Jackson pulled the blanket higher and stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the storm. Dawn was still hours away, but when it came, he would ride out. He would follow whatever trail remained, and he would bring back Sarah Mitchell, alive or dead, because a child deserved to know what happened to her mother. Jackson turned back to look at the small figure by his fireplace. Lily slept peacefully, one hand clutching that straw doll. Grace had slept like that once, peaceful and trusting. Grace had been wrong to feel safe. Jackson had not protected her, but he was here now, and this child would not die alone in the snow, would not wonder why no one came, would not learn that promises meant nothing. He would keep this promise if it killed him. In the dark hours before dawn, sitting in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, Jackson Ashford felt something he had not felt in 4 years. Not happiness, not hope, but purpose. A child needed him. And for the first time since Emma and Grace died, that was enough. Dawn came slowly, the sky lightening from black to gray without ever quite reaching blue. The storm had broken sometime near morning, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow lay 3 feet deep in places, sculpted by wind into drifts that looked like frozen waves. The landscape was utterly silent, the kind of silence that follows great violence. Jackson had not slept. He stood by the window drinking coffee, watching the lights strengthen, planning his route. Lily still slept by the fire, her breathing steady now, color returning to her cheeks. He had checked on her hourly through the night. She would live. That much was certain. Whether her mother would was another question entirely. He left a note on the table in case Lily woke. Gone to find your mother. Stay by fire. Eat bread and cheese on counter. Back soon, Jack. Simple words for a simple message, though nothing about the situation was simple at all. He saddled Ranger, his chestnut stallion, and packed supplies. Rope, blankets, a flask of whiskey for medicinal purposes. His rifle. He dressed in layers, knowing the cold would be brutal, even with the storm past. Lily had said her mother went to Pine Creek. The most direct route would take Sarah past his ranch, then south along the creek bed. If she had made it to Pine Creek and started back before the storm worsened, she might have gotten within a few miles of home before succumbing. Jackson mounted and turned Ranger south. The horse moved slowly through deep snow, each step deliberate. They followed the creek, Jackson's eyes scanning constantly for any sign of passage. A voice spoke in his head, the voice he used when teaching his grandchildren decades in the future. You see, James, tracking is about reading the land. Every broken branch tells a story. Every disturbed drift. The land doesn't lie the way people do. After an hour, he found the first sign. Footprints, mostly filled with new snow but still visible as depressions. Adult-sized. A woman's boots, size 6, heels worn on the left side. Someone who walked with a slight limp, perhaps from an old injury. Sarah Mitchell's tracks. He followed them carefully, Ranger picking his way around drifts. The prince headed south toward Pine Creek, steady and purposeful. She had been walking with determination, not yet panicked by the storm. Then, 2 miles further, the pattern changed. The footprints became erratic, closer together. She had been moving faster, running perhaps, and crossing her path were larger boot prints. Size 11, military issue pattern, a man's boots. Jackson's jaw tightened. He dismounted and examined the snow more carefully. Signs of a struggle. The snow disturbed in a wide area. Then drag marks, approximately 110 pounds, pulled 200 feet before the trail disappeared into the stream bed. Someone had attacked Sarah Mitchell, had dragged her toward the frozen water. Jackson followed the drag marks to the stream's edge. There, half buried in a snowdrift, he found a piece of blue fabric. He pulled it free, a torn section of a woman's coat. His hand closed into a fist around the fabric. He knew what this meant, knew the statistics about women who disappeared in the wilderness, knew the likelihood of finding Sarah Mitchell alive had just dropped to nearly zero. But he kept going, followed the stream bed, searching both banks. The morning sun climbed higher, turning the snow to diamonds, beautiful and indifferent. Then he saw her. A figure collapsed near the water's edge, half buried in snow, so still she might have been carved from ice. Jackson spurred Ranger forward and dismounted at a run. He dropped to his knees beside her. Sarah Mitchell, early 30s, dark hair matted with blood, face bruised and swollen. Her lips were purple, skin gray. A cut marked her temple where someone had struck her. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. She had fought back. He could see that from the defensive wounds on her hands. Jackson pressed 2 fingers to her neck, not daring to hope. A pulse, faint, irregular, but present. "Sarah," he said, though she could not hear. "Sarah Mitchell, can you hear me?" No response. She was deeply unconscious, hypothermic, possibly dying, but not dead yet. Jackson did not hesitate. He pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, lifted her into his arms. She weighed more than Lily but still felt too light, as if the cold had hollowed her out. He carried her to Ranger and managed to mount while holding her against his chest. Lily would wake soon and be frightened, but he could not leave Sarah here to die while he returned for the child. "We're going home," he told the unconscious woman. "Your daughter is waiting. You're going to live because Lily needs you. Do you understand? You're going to live." The ride back took twice as long. Ranger moved carefully, sensing the precious cargo. Jackson held Sarah close, trying to share what warmth his body could provide. He talked to her, constant reassurance, though she gave no sign of hearing. "Your daughter is remarkable. She walked through a blizzard to find you. 3 years old and she had the courage of a soldier. You raised her well, Sarah Mitchell. Whatever else you've done, whatever mistakes you've made, you raised a child who loves you enough to risk everything." When they reached the cabin, smoke still rose from the chimney. Lily must have added wood to the fire as instructed. Smart child, practical. Jackson dismounted awkwardly, still holding Sarah. He kicked the door open. Lily sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets, clutching Rosie. When she saw them, her face transformed. "Mommy, you found Mommy!" "I found her, sweetheart, but she's very sick. I need you to be brave a little longer. Can you do that?" Lily nodded solemnly, her eyes huge. Jackson laid Sarah on the cot in the bedroom, the same bed he had not slept in for weeks because he preferred the chair by the fire, preferred to punish himself with discomfort. He worked quickly, efficiently. Removed Sarah's wet clothes, checking for injuries as he went. Bruises covered her ribs. The cut on her temple was deep but had stopped bleeding. Worst were the signs of old trauma. Healed fractures on her left arm, burn marks on her shoulder, bruises in various stages of healing. This woman had been hurt before, many times, by someone who knew how to inflict pain without leaving obvious marks. Jackson wrapped her in blankets, added hot water bottles around her core, started tea brewing, did everything his medical books had taught him about treating hypothermia and shock. Lily appeared in the doorway. "Is Mommy going to die?" Jackson looked at the child, at those wide blue eyes full of fear and trust. He could lie, tell her everything would be fine. But something in him rebelled against lying to this brave little girl who deserved truth. "I don't know," he said. "She's very cold and hurt, but I'm going to do everything I can to help her. And you know what? What? I think she's strong. She made it through the storm. She's a fighter like you. Fighters don't give up easily. Lily came closer and climbed onto the bed, careful not to jostle her mother. She took Sarah's hand in both of her small ones. Mommy, she whispered, it's Lily. I'm here. Uncle Jack found you. You're going to be okay. You have to be okay. Then in a voice so soft Jackson almost missed it, she added, please don't leave me like Grandma did. Jackson's throat tightened. He turned away, ostensibly to check the fire but really to compose himself. When he turned back, he saw something that made him freeze. Sarah's hand, the one Lily held, had moved, just slightly, fingers twitching, closing weakly around the child's small hand. And on Sarah's face, tears, not from pain but from something else. Recognition, love. The involuntary response of a mother who heard her daughter's voice and was fighting to come back. She heard you, Jackson said quietly. Lily, your mother heard you. The child's face lit with hope, so pure it hurt to witness. They kept vigil together, man and child, through that long day. Jackson monitored Sarah's vital signs, changed blankets, administered warm liquids when she was conscious enough to swallow. Lily talked to her mother constantly, telling stories about Rosie, about the chickens she had seen, about the nice man named Jack who had saved them both. As afternoon's shadows lengthened, Sarah's eyes finally opened, unfocused at first, then slowly clearing. They found Lily's face and held there. Lily, she whispered, her voice like broken glass. My baby. Mommy! Lily burst into tears, happy tears this time. You're awake. You're really awake. Sarah tried to sit up, gasped at the pain in her ribs, fell back. Her eyes found Jackson standing in the doorway. Who? She managed. Jack Ashford. Your daughter found my ranch during the storm. I went looking for you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're badly hurt, and I need to know who did this to you. Sarah's face changed. Fear replaced gratitude. Her hand tightened on Lily protectively. Marcus, she whispered. My husband. He found us. The name hung in the air like a curse. Jackson's jaw tightened. Tell me, he said quietly. And Sarah, with Lily drowsing against her shoulder, began to speak. She told him about Marcus Bennett, about the marriage when she was 17, about the violence that started slowly and escalated, about the first baby, Daniel, lost when Marcus struck her during one of his rages, about running 2 years ago when Lily was barely more than a baby herself. I've been hiding, she said, voice breaking, moving every few months. Pine Creek was supposed to be safe, remote enough that he'd never find us. But 3 days ago, I saw him in town. He didn't see me, but I knew. I knew he was close. Yesterday, I had to get medicine for Lily's cough. I waited until I thought he had left the area, but he was waiting on the trail. He grabbed me, said I was his property, said he'd burn our cabin with Lily inside if I didn't come with him. Her hand went to her face, touching the bruises. I fought, managed to break away, ran toward home. But he caught me again by the stream. Hit me. I fell. Last thing I remember is the cold. Jackson listened, his face expressionless, but his hands clenched into fists. He knew men like Marcus Bennett, had done business with them in his railroad days. Men who saw women and children as possessions rather than people. Where is he now? Jackson asked. I don't know. Maybe he thought I was dead and left. Or maybe... Her eyes widened with fresh fear. Maybe he went to our cabin looking for Lily. The cabin is empty. Lily came to me. But he'll keep looking. He always does. We have to leave, tonight, before he finds us here. Jackson shook his head slowly. No, you're in no condition to travel, and I'm done running. You don't understand. Marcus was a soldier. He knows how to track, how to hunt. He'll kill you to get to us. Let him try. Jackson's voice was cold, harder than Sarah had yet heard it. I've got defensible positions here. Supplies, weapons, and something your Marcus doesn't have. What's that? A reason to stand and fight that's stronger than his reason to attack. He looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully against her mother's shoulder. No one is taking that child from you, Sarah Mitchell. No one is hurting either of you again. Not while I'm alive to prevent it. Sarah stared at him, tears streaming down her face.
Why
Why would you do this for strangers? Jackson was quiet for a long moment. Then, because 4 years ago someone needed help and I wasn't there. Because I failed the people I loved most. Because I've spent every day since then trying to figure out what redemption looks like. He met her eyes. Maybe this is it. Maybe helping you is how I start to balance the scales. And you don't owe us anything. No, but that little girl knocked on my door in a blizzard. And when someone asks you for help like that, with that much courage, you don't turn them away. You don't let them down. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the snow orange and pink, beautiful and cold and indifferent to human suffering. But inside the cabin, something fragile and precious was taking root. Not family, not yet, but the possibility of it. The first tentative threads of connection between three broken souls who had found each other by accident and chance. Or perhaps not by chance at all. Perhaps by something older and deeper than chance. The kind of providence that brings people together when they need each other most, that creates families from strangers, that offers second chances to those who believe they deserve none. Jackson stood and walked to the window. Somewhere out there, Marcus Bennett was looking for his missing wife and daughter, looking with the focused intensity of a predator who had lost his prey. Let him come, Jackson thought. Let him come and learn what it meant to face a man who had nothing left to lose except this one chance at redemption, this one opportunity to protect instead of fail, to save instead of destroy. He would not fail again. He would not. The first 48 hours after bringing Sarah home were a blur of careful nursing and constant vigilance. Jackson moved through the motions with the methodical precision of a man who understood that survival often depended on attention to small details, on doing things right rather than doing them quickly. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting twin battles against hypothermia and the injuries Marcus had inflicted. Jackson had seen enough in his medical texts to know the danger signs. Fever could mean infection. Confusion could mean brain injury from the blow to her head. Irregular breathing could mean her ribs had punctured something vital. But he had also learned something else from those books, something the authors never quite stated explicitly, but that lived between the lines. The will to live mattered. And Sarah Mitchell, opening her eyes every few hours to find Lily's face hovering close, whispering reassurances to her frightened daughter, clearly possessed that will in abundance. Jackson established a routine, the kind of structured schedule that had once governed his business life and now governed this strange new purpose. Every 2 hours he checked Sarah's vital signs: pulse, respiration, temperature measured with a hand against her forehead for lack of a proper thermometer. He changed the compress on her temple wound, watching for signs of infection. He helped her drink when she was conscious enough, warm broth made from venison and vegetables, sweet tea with honey for energy. Lily became his assistant, too young to truly help, but old enough to feel useful, which Jackson suspected mattered more. She would fetch clean cloths when asked, hold the cup while he supported her mother's head, talk constantly to Sarah about nothing and everything in that way children have of filling silence with sound. Mommy, the chickens here are so funny. One of them, Uncle Jack, calls her Henrietta. She chases the others. And Mommy, there are books everywhere, so many books. Uncle Jack has said when you're better, he'll read to us. And Mommy, guess what? He has 6 horses. 6! Can you believe it? Jackson found himself grateful for the child's chatter. It filled the cabin with life, pushed back against the heavy silence that had dominated these rooms for 4 years, made the space feel less like a tomb and more like a home. On the second night, Sarah woke with a scream that brought Jackson running from the main room where he had been trying and failing to sleep in his chair. He found her sitting upright in bed, eyes wild, hands raised defensively. No, please. I'll come back. Just don't hurt her. Marcus, please, Sarah. Jackson kept his voice calm, his movements slow as he approached. Sarah, you're safe. You're at my ranch. Marcus isn't here. She looked at him without recognition, trapped in whatever nightmare held her. Jackson glanced at Lily, curled in a nest of blankets on the floor beside the bed. The child was awake now, watching with frightened eyes. Sarah, he tried again, Lily is here. Your daughter is safe. Look. He picked up Lily, careful despite his urgency, and brought her close. The child reached for her mother instinctively. Mommy, I'm here. It's me. It's Lily. We're safe with Uncle Jack. Sarah's eyes focused. She saw Lily, and something in her face crumbled. She pulled her daughter close, sobbing into her hair, whole body shaking with more than cold. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. I should have protected you better. Should have gone farther. Should have been smarter. He found us, and I failed you. You didn't fail. Jackson's voice was firm. You kept her safe for 2 years. You taught her to be strong enough to survive a blizzard. You fought Marcus and escaped. You are not a failure, Sarah Mitchell. You are a survivor. She looked up at me. We was him. Tears streaming. He'll come back. He always comes back. We have to leave tonight before he finds us. You can't travel, not for days, maybe weeks. Your ribs are bruised, possibly cracked. That head wound needs time to heal. And where would you go? Another cabin? Another town? How long before he finds you again? But if we stay, he'll kill you. He'll kill all of us. Jackson sat on the edge of the bed, his expression serious. Then we make sure he doesn't get that chance. Tomorrow, when you're stronger, we talk about how to end this properly. Legally, we get the law involved. We make sure Marcus Bennett can't hurt you again. The law won't help. I'm still his wife legally. I never divorced him, couldn't risk him finding me through the paperwork. Under the law, he has rights. I don't. Then we change that. Jackson's voice carried the confidence of a man who had once moved millions of dollars with a signature, who had built and destroyed companies with decisions made in boardrooms. The law is not immutable, Sarah. It can be bent, sometimes broken, always navigated. We find a way. Sarah wanted to believe him. Jackson could see it in her face, the desperate hope warring with learned helplessness, with 2 years of running and hiding and expecting the worst. Oui, Beno, she asked again. Why would you risk yourself for us? Jackson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief and older guilt. I told you I failed people I loved. That's not entirely accurate. I killed them. Through negligence and greed and the arrogant belief that money mattered more than safety. He told her then about Emma and Grace, about the railroad merger and the maintenance report, about the bridge that collapsed because he and others had valued quarterly profits over human lives, about standing in a morgue looking at his wife and daughter, knowing he was responsible, knowing no amount of wealth could undo what his decisions had done. I came here to die slowly, he said, to punish myself with isolation and hard labor and the constant reminder of what I'd lost. But your daughter knocked on my door, Sarah. She asked for help with such courage, such desperate hope, that I couldn't turn away, didn't want to turn away. He looked at Lily, asleep again in her mother's arms. Maybe I can't save Emma and Grace. They're gone. But I can save you too. And maybe if I do this right, if I don't fail this time, maybe that starts to balance the scales. Maybe that's what redemption looks like. Sarah reached out and took his hand. Her grip was weak but steady. Thank you. Whatever happens, thank you for trying. Jackson squeezed her hand gently, then released it. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start planning. And Sarah, this time you don't run. This time we fight. By the 4th day, Sarah was strong enough to sit up without assistance, to eat solid food, to think clearly about their situation. The bruises on her face had turned from purple to yellow-green. The cut on her temple was healing cleanly, and though her ribs still hurt with every deep breath, she could move around the cabin with Jackson's help. Lily had taken to ranch life with the adaptability of childhood. She followed Jackson everywhere when he did his morning chores, helped scatter feed for the chickens, watched with fascination as he milked the cow he had borrowed from old Pete the previous year. She asked endless questions, and Jackson found himself answering with a patience that surprised him. Why do you brush the horses every day, Uncle Jack? Because they can't do it themselves. And because taking care of things you depend on, that's what makes you worthy of depending on them. You understand? Lily nodded seriously, filing away this wisdom alongside everything else Jack taught her. How to check if eggs were fresh by putting them in water. how to tell which wood was dry enough for burning, how to read weather signs in the sky and the behavior of animals. Sarah watched these interactions from the window, leaning against the frame for support, feeling something complicated twist in her chest. This was what a father should be: patient, teaching, present. Everything Marcus had never been, even before the violence started. On the fourth evening, when Lily was finally asleep in the bedroom they had been sharing, Sarah and Jackson sat by the fire. He had given her the rocking chair, the comfortable one, while he took the straight-back seat he preferred. Old habits of penance died hard. "We need to talk about Marcus," Jackson said without preamble, "about what happens when he comes looking. Not if, when." "When," Jackson agreed. "So tell me about him, his training, his capabilities. I need to know what we're facing." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, though the fire burned warm. He was Army, served in the Apache campaigns in the 70s. Discharged in 81, honorable but with notes about temperament issues. He's a tracker, a hunter. It's what he did in the Army, and it's what he loves. Skills? He can follow a trail days old. He knows how to set snares, traps. He can shoot accurately at 200 yards with a rifle. He's strong, faster than he looks. And he has no conscience when it comes to violence. The war did something to him. Or maybe it just brought out what was already there. Jackson nodded slowly, absorbing this. Does he work alone? Usually, but he has friends from the Army, men who owe him favors. If he's serious about finding us, he might bring help. How many? 2, maybe 3 at most. Wyatt Cole was his closest friend. They served together. And there's a man named Frank something, a drifter Marcus hired for tracking jobs before. Jackson stood and walked to his desk, pulled out paper and a pencil. He began sketching the ranch layout from above. The cabin here, barn here. Well, here, tree line starts about 80 yards out on 3 sides. Open ground to the south toward the creek. He marked distances, sight lines, potential approaches. Sarah recognized the methodical thinking, the way he broke down a problem into components that could be analyzed and addressed. This was a man who had run companies, made decisions that affected thousands. That mind, applied to their survival, felt reassuring in a way she had not expected. If Marcus comes, he'll likely scout first, Jackson said. Watch the ranch from the tree line, figure out how many people are here, what our routines are. He's patient. He'll wait for the right moment. Then what? Then we make sure the right moment never comes. Or when it does, we're ready. He outlined his thinking. They would set perimeter alarms, simple things like strings with bells attached to trees at the forest edge. The horses would be kept in the barn at night where they would alert to any approach. Jackson would sleep in the main room with his rifle, Sarah and Lily in the bedroom with the door barred from inside. We also need legal protection, Jackson continued. I'm riding to town tomorrow, filing proper papers for this land deed you've been using, getting it made legal and in your name. Jack, that's your land. It's territorial land I filed a claim on. I can transfer that claim easily enough. Point is, once it's yours legally, Marcus is trespassing if he sets foot on your property. Gives the sheriff grounds to arrest him that have nothing to do with your marriage. The law won't help. I told you, he has rights as my husband. Not if we establish that he abandoned you, that he was violent. I'm also wiring my lawyers in Boston. They'll research Texas law on marriage dissolution, see if we can find grounds for annulment or divorce that don't require Marcus's participation. Sarah stared at him. That could take months, cost thousands. I have thousands, and months are fine if it means you're free at the end of them. Why would you spend that kind of money on strangers? Jackson set down his pencil and looked at her directly. You're not strangers anymore. The moment I brought you into this house, the moment I promised Lily I'd find you, you became my responsibility. I don't break my promises, Sarah. Not anymore. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I don't deserve this. Don't deserve you helping us. Deserve has nothing to do with it. Need is what matters. You need help. I can provide it. That's enough. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn down. Then Sarah asked the question that had been building in her since she regained consciousness. Jack, what happened to you? I mean, I know about the bridge, about Emma and Grace, but what happened after? How did you end up here? Jackson was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak, and once started, the words came like water from a broken dam. He told her about the months after the accident, the drinking that started moderate and became excessive, the business meetings he missed, the decisions he failed to make, how his fellow board members had gently suggested he take time away, how he had interpreted that correctly as forced retirement disguised as concern. He told her about selling everything, not just the railroad shares, but the Boston townhouse, the summer home in Newport, the horses and carriages, and all the trappings of wealth, about dividing the money with surgical precision, giving most of it away because keeping it felt like profiting from murder. He told her about the journey west, traveling by rail and then by horse as the rail lines ended and the wilderness began. About choosing Wyoming because it was far enough from anything that reminded him of his former life. About building this cabin with his own hands, every nail driven a small act of penance. I thought if I suffered enough, if I made myself uncomfortable enough, maybe it would hurt less. But it didn't. The grief stayed the same. Only now I was uncomfortable and grief-stricken instead of just grief-stricken. So why stay? Sarah asked softly. Because leaving would mean going back, and I can't go back. Can't face Boston society knowing what I did. Can't sit in boardrooms making decisions about other people's lives when I failed so catastrophically with the decisions I made before. But you're making decisions now about us, about how to handle Marcus. That's different. How, Mayo? Jackson struggled to articulate it. Business decisions were always abstract, numbers on paper, profits and losses. It was easy to forget that behind every number was a person, a life, a family. But this? You and Lily? There's nothing abstract here. I see exactly who I'm helping and why. See the consequences of my choices immediately. Does that make sense? It does, Sarah said. And Jack, for what it's worth, you're making good choices now, better than good. You're giving us a chance we wouldn't have had otherwise. We'll see. Ask me again when this is over and Marcus is dealt with and you're both safe. Then we can evaluate how well I did. Sarah smiled, small but genuine. Fair enough. They lapsed into comfortable silence again. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the eaves, rattling the shutters. It sounded like the storm might be returning, another wave of winter's fury rolling across the high plains. But inside, the fire burned warm. And for the first time in 2 years, Sarah felt something she had almost forgotten. Not safety exactly. She was too experienced to believe in safety anymore. But possibility. The possibility that this time might be different. That this stranger who had become their protector might actually succeed where she had failed alone. The possibility of hope. 3 days later, as Jackson rode toward town to file the legal papers and send his telegrams, Marcus Bennett sat in a camp 10 miles east and planned his next move. He had been searching for Sarah for 5 days now, ever since he had grabbed her on the trail and she had escaped his grip. He had assumed she would die in the storm, had actually felt relief at the thought because death would solve his problem without requiring him to make impossible choices. But she had not died, or if she had, no one had found the body yet. And Marcus needed to know, needed certainty, because if Sarah was alive, she still belonged to him. And if she was dead, well, at least Lily remained. His daughter, his blood, his responsibility, and his property. He had checked the Mitchell cabin first, empty and cold, fire long dead, no sign of recent habitation. That told him nothing useful except that Sarah and Lily were not there. Then he had begun the wider search. He rode circuits around Pine Creek, stopping at every ranch and homestead within a day's ride, asking if anyone had seen a woman and small child. Most people looked at him with suspicion, gave vague non-answers, sent him away. Frontier folk were like that, protective of their own, distrustful of strangers asking questions. But one old rancher, drunk on bad whiskey, had mentioned seeing smoke from a cabin about 8 miles northwest. Nobody lived out that way that the old man knew of, but smoke meant somebody. Could be squatters, could be travelers, could be anybody. It was not much, but it was more than Marcus had before. He would check this cabin, this mysterious source of smoke. And if Sarah was there, if she had found shelter with someone foolish enough to take her in, well, he would handle that problem the way he always handled problems. With decisive, overwhelming force. Marcus was not entirely without conscience. He knew in some dim corner of his mind that remained capable of self-reflection, that he had become a monster. That the man Sarah had married at 17, the man who had seemed noble and strong and protective, had curdled into something ugly and cruel. The war had started it, or maybe just revealed what was already there. He had done things in the Apache campaigns that woke him screaming still. Had killed men, women, children who looked at him with hatred or fear or pleading. And he had killed them anyway because orders were orders and survival meant following orders without question. Coming home had not helped. The civilians who thanked him for his service had no idea what service meant, had no comprehension of what he had seen and done. He had tried to explain it to Sarah once, tried to make her understand why he woke shouting, why he could not stand to be touched unexpectedly, why crowds made his skin crawl. But she had not understood, had looked at him with pity and slight disgust, and that disgust had enraged him in ways he could not control. She was supposed to comfort him, supposed to make the nightmare stop, supposed to love him enough that the darkness went away. Instead, she had left, had taken his daughter and disappeared, proving what he had always feared, that love was conditional, that everyone left eventually, that he was alone in ways that could never be fixed. Finding them again had become his purpose, not because he loved Sarah, though he told himself he did, but because letting her go meant accepting defeat, meant admitting that he could not hold on to anything, that everything he touched turned to ash and pain. So he would find them, and this time he would make sure they could never leave again. Wyatt Cole rode up, leading 2 horses laden with supplies. Wyatt had been Marcus's sergeant during the war, had followed his orders without question then and did so now. A simple man, loyal to a fault, who asked no uncomfortable questions about why they were hunting a woman and child across frozen wilderness. Found some tracks about a mile south, Wyatt reported. Horse prints heading northwest, recent, maybe 2 days old. Could be our mystery cabin dweller. Marcus nodded slowly. We follow them, carefully. If Sarah's there, if someone's protecting her, I don't want to tip our hand until we know the situation. And if someone is protecting her? Marcus's hand drifted to the revolver at his hip. Then we remind them that some things are worth fighting for, and some fights are lost before they begin. They broke camp and rode northwest, following the tracks Wyatt had found. The trail was easy enough to follow for men with their skills. A lone rider moving with purpose, returning to a fixed location. As the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink, they saw smoke rising in the distance. A cabin, substantial and well-maintained, with a large barn and several outbuildings. Not a squatter's hovel, but a real homestead. Marcus dismounted and pulled out a small brass telescope, a souvenir from his army days. He trained it on the cabin, watching for signs of life. There, a figure emerged from the barn, a man tall and well-built, carrying a bucket. He wore the practical clothes of a rancher, moved with the confidence of someone on his own property. As Marcus watched, the man stopped and looked toward the cabin, called something Marcus could not hear. The door opened, a small figure appeared. A child, Lily. Marcus's breath caught. His daughter, alive and apparently healthy, running to the man with the unconscious trust of childhood. The man set down his bucket and knelt, spoke to Lily, handed her something. An egg, it looked like. Lily laughed, holding it carefully. Then another figure appeared in the doorway. A woman, Sarah. She was alive. Thinner than Marcus remembered, moving stiffly like she hurt, but alive and upright and clearly recovered enough from their encounter on the trail. Marcus lowered the telescope, his jaw tight. Sarah had found help, had found someone willing to take her in, protect her. Some man who probably thought himself noble, thought himself a hero for sheltering a woman in distress. That man had no idea what he had stepped into, had no comprehension of what Marcus was willing to do to reclaim what was his. That's them, Marcus said to Wyatt. My wife and daughter, in that cabin with some stranger who thinks he's protecting them. What do we do? Marcus thought for a long moment. They could attack now, overwhelm the cabin through surprise and superior numbers. But that risked injury to Sarah or Lily, and Marcus did not want to hurt them. Not permanently. They were his family. He just needed to remind them of that fact. We wait, he said finally. Watch their patterns, learn their routines, then we take them back cleanly. No mess, no witnesses. And the man? Marcus's face hardened. He made his choice when he opened his door to my family. Now he lives with the consequences. They made cold camp in the tree line, far enough from the cabin to avoid detection, but close enough to maintain surveillance. As darkness fell and lamplight glowed warm from the cabin windows, Marcus watched with the patient focus of a predator. He had waited 2 years. He could wait a few more days. And when the moment came, when the opportunity presented itself, he would strike with the decisive brutality that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Apache territory. Sarah thought she was safe. The man protecting her thought he could stand against a trained soldier. They were both wrong, and soon, very soon, Marcus would prove it. Jackson rode into Pine Creek Settlement just after noon, his saddlebags heavy with items for filing at the territorial office and messages to be sent by telegraph. The town was small, perhaps 24 buildings clustered around a wide main street that turned to mud in spring and froze to ruts in winter. He tied Ranger outside the territorial land office, a small building that also served as the post office and telegraph station. Inside, a clerk named Whitmore looked up from a massive ledger. Help you? Need to file a land claim. Transfer, actually, from my existing claim to a new owner. Jackson laid out the paperwork he had spent the previous evening in preparing. The claim was straightforward enough. He had purchased the 2,000 acres 4 years ago, had improved the land as required by the Homestead Act, now wanted to transfer ownership of a portion to Sarah Mitchell. Whitmore examined the papers with the slow deliberation of a man who took bureaucracy seriously. Section 14, Township 42 North. That's your claim, Mr. Ashford? It is. And you wanted to transfer 800 acres to this Sarah Mitchell and she family? No. Business arrangement? Jackson had anticipated this question and had his answer ready. I'm employing Mrs. Mitchell as a housekeeper and nurse. Part of her compensation includes land ownership after a year of service. I'm filing the initial transfer now to establish legal claim. It was not entirely a lie. Sarah was helping around the cabin, was certainly capable of nursing given her medical knowledge. The fact that she was also fleeing a violent husband did not need to be part of the public record. Pemberton made notes in his ledger. Filing fee is $18. Survey was already done when you purchased, so no additional charge there. I'll process this and have the deed ready in 2 weeks. She'll need to come in and sign. She's recovering from illness. Can I sign on her behalf with a power of attorney? You have such a document. Jackson produced another paper, this one signed by Sarah that morning. It gave him temporary authority to act on her behalf in legal matters relating to property. Another layer of protection, another way to establish her independence from Marcus. Pemberton accepted it, added it to his file. That'll do. Anything else? I need to send 3 telegrams. Jackson handed over the messages he had written out the night before. The first was to his lawyers in Boston. Research Texas marital law, stop grounds for divorce. Violent husband, stop wife. Fled state fear for life, stop urgent guidance needed, stop Ashford. The second was to his bank. Transfer $5,000 to Wyoming Territorial Bank. Stop account Ashford. Stop authorized withdrawals by Sarah Mitchell, stop urgent. The third was to a private investigator he had used in business dealings. Background check, Marcus Bennett, Texas. Stop military record. Criminal history associations. Stop wire results. Stop pay triple standard rate priority, stop Ashford. Pemberton counted the words, calculated costs. That'll be $14 for the 3 telegrams. Jackson paid without hesitation, $32 total for papers and communications. A pittance compared to what he had once spent on a single business lunch, but out here it represented substantial investment. He was telling anyone who cared to notice that Sarah Mitchell mattered to him, that he was willing to spend money to protect her interests. Word would get around. In a town this small, everything got around, and that was fine. Better that Marcus hear through gossip that Sarah had a protector with resources. Better that he know any move against her would meet resistance. Mr. Ashford, Pemberton said as Jackson turned to leave, might want to talk to Sheriff Garrett before you head back. He was asking about you this morning. Jackson paused. About me specifically? About anybody new in the area. He's had reports of strangers asking questions, men with military bearing. One of them was asking about a woman and child, said his wife ran off with his daughter. Jackson's jaw tightened. Marcus was already here, already searching. The timeline had just accelerated. Where's the sheriff's office? Next building down. Can't miss it. Jackson found Sheriff Garrett in a cramped office that smelled of coffee and old tobacco. The sheriff was in his mid-40s, weathered and competent looking, the kind of man who had seen enough trouble to recognize it when it came looking. You'd be Ashford, Garrett said without preamble. Pete mentioned you bought that property out past his place a few years back. Keep to yourself mostly. That's right. Pete also mentioned you brought in a woman and child about a week ago. Woman half frozen, looked like she'd been beaten. Jackson said nothing, waiting. Now I've got a man named Marcus Bennett asking around about his missing wife and daughter. Says she's unstable, took the child without permission. He's worried for their safety. He's got papers, marriage certificate, birth certificate with his name as father. Legally speaking, he's got rights. And physically speaking, Jackson said carefully, he's got a pattern of violence that explains why his wife ran. I found Sarah Mitchell collapsed in the snow, beaten and left to die. Her daughter had walked through a blizzard looking for her mother. Those are facts. Facts aren't always the same as law, Mr. Ashford. I'm aware. I'm also aware that Sarah is currently on property that will be legally deeded to her within 2 weeks. Marcus Bennett sets foot on that property without permission. He's trespassing. You can arrest him for that without getting into the mess of marital law. Garrett leaned back in his chair. You got money, don't you? Real money, not just ranch money. I do. And you're willing to spend it protecting these people. I am. The sheriff nodded slowly. Pete said you were a railroad man before you came out here. Said there was some kind of accident back east that you felt responsible for. That true? Jackson met his eyes. A bridge collapsed. 43 people died. I was on the board that delayed maintenance, so yes, I feel responsible. Because I am responsible. And now you're trying to balance those scales. Something like that. Garrett was quiet for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. All right, here's how this plays. Marcus Bennett comes to me with legal papers. I have to acknowledge his rights as husband and father. That's law. But if he trespasses, if he threatens or harms anyone, if he violates any territorial statute, I can act on that. And I will. Fair enough. I'm also going to ride out your way day after tomorrow. Official visit. Check on the welfare of Mrs. Mitchell and her daughter. Make sure they're being treated properly. While I'm there, I'll make note of property boundaries. Inform Mr. Bennett in writing that certain areas are off limits to him. I appreciate that, Sheriff. Don't appreciate it yet. If this turns violent, Mr. Ashford, there's only so much I can do. I've got 2 deputies and jurisdiction over 300 square miles. Response time to your ranch is 90 minutes minimum. If Bennett decides to take his family back by force, you'll be on your own until I can get there. Understood. You prepared for that possibility? Jackson thought of the rifles cleaned and loaded, the ammunition stored, the defensive positions he had already mapped out in his mind. I'm prepared. Then I wish you luck. You'll need it. Marcus Bennett was Army, and from what I hear, he was good at the ugly parts of Army work. Tracking, ambush, close quarters fighting. You're a businessman turned rancher. No offense, but that's not equal odds. Maybe not, but I've got something he doesn't. What's that? A reason to fight that's stronger than his. He wants possession. I want to prevent harm. Those aren't the same thing. Garrett smiled grimly. No, they're not. Still gets you killed just as dead, though. Jackson left the sheriff's office with more information and less comfort. Marcus was already in the area, already asking questions. It was only a matter of time before he pinpointed the ranch, if he had not already. The ride home took 3 hours. Jackson pushed Ranger harder than he liked, but speed mattered now. He needed to get back, needed to tell Sarah what he had learned, needed to make sure their defenses were as ready as possible. The sun was setting when he finally came within sight of the ranch. Everything looked peaceful. Smoke rose from the chimney. The horses were visible in the corral. Nothing seemed amiss, but something made Jackson uneasy, some instinct that said he was being watched. He scanned the tree line as he approached, saw nothing obvious, but the feeling persisted. He dismounted at the barn and led Ranger inside. Sarah appeared in the doorway, Lily beside her. "Joe, you're back. Did everything go well?" "Inside," Jackson said quietly. "We need to talk." They gathered in the cabin, Lily playing quietly with Rosie while the adults spoke in low voices by the fire. "Marcus is in Pine Creek," Jackson said without preamble. "He's been asking around, showing papers, claiming legal rights to you and Lily. Sheriff knows about it." Sarah's face went pale. "How long before he finds us?" "Could be days, could be hours. The sheriff's going to help where he can, but legally Marcus has rights as your husband. The only real protection we have is that you'll own this land soon. Once that's filed, he's trespassing if he comes here." "2 weeks, you said. We have to survive 2 weeks." "We will." Jackson's voice was firm. "I've got supplies, ammunition, defensible positions, and I've sent for information on Marcus, his background, anything that might give us leverage. We just need to stay alert." "Jack," Sarah's voice was soft, "if he comes, if there's violence, you don't have to fight for us. We can leave. Run again. I won't let you get hurt because of us." Jackson shook his head. "No more running. This ends here, one way or another." He did not tell her about the feeling of being watched, did not mention the unease that had followed him from the tree line. But that night he slept in the main room with his rifle across his lap and his boots on, ready for whatever came. And in the darkness beyond the cabin, Marcus Bennett watched the lamplight through his telescope and planned his approach, patient as death, inevitable as winter. The attack came on the 8th night after Jackson had returned from town, in that darkest hour just before dawn when human vigilance is at its lowest and the body's circadian rhythms demand sleep regardless of danger. Jackson had been dozing in his chair, rifle across his lap, when the first sound penetrated his consciousness. Not a loud sound, just the soft tinkle of a bell from the perimeter alarm he had strung through the trees 3 days earlier. His eyes snapped open. He was on his feet before conscious thought engaged, moving to the window, pressing against the wall where he could see out without being silhouetted by the dying fire behind him. Movement in the tree line. 3 shapes, darker than the surrounding barrenness, moving with the practiced coordination of men who had done this before. Military precision. No wasted motion. Jackson's mouth went dry. Marcus had not come alone. He moved quickly to the bedroom door and rapped twice, the signal he and Sarah had agreed upon. He heard movement inside, then Sarah's voice, barely audible. "I hear you, we're going to the cellar. Be quick. They're here." The cabin had a small root cellar accessed through a trap door in the bedroom floor. It was cramped and cold but secure, with walls of thick stone and a heavy door that could be barred from inside. Jackson had stocked it with blankets, food, water, and a lantern. If the worst happened, if the cabin was breached, Sarah and Lily could hide there for days if necessary. He heard the scrape of the trapdoor opening, then closing. Sarah would bar it from below. They were as safe as he could make them. Now he had to keep them that way. Jackson moved to the gun rack and took down his second rifle, a repeating Winchester he had purchased but never fired. He loaded both weapons with methodical care, then positioned himself at the main window with a clear field of fire toward the barn. The waiting was worse than action. Minutes stretched like hours. He could see nothing now in the tree line. No movement, no sign of the figures he had glimpsed. But they were there. He knew they were there. Then fire bloomed in the darkness. The barn. They had set the barn on fire. Jackson cursed under his breath. The horses were in there, 6 animals that would panic and die in the flames if he did nothing. But leaving the cabin meant exposing himself, meant giving Marcus exactly what he wanted, a target in the open. The sound of horses screaming made the decision for him. He could not let them burn. Jackson grabbed his rifle and moved to the back door, the one that faced away from the tree line where Marcus and his men were positioned. He opened it carefully, checked the immediate area, then ran for the barn. The heat hit him 20 feet away. The fire had already consumed the hayloft, was spreading down the walls with terrifying speed. Jackson pulled his shirt up over his mouth and nose and plunged inside. The horses were in full panic, rearing and kicking in their stalls. Jackson moved down the line, throwing open each stall door, slapping the animals on the hindquarters to drive them toward the exit. Most needed no encouragement, bolting past him into the night. But Ranger, his chestnut stallion, was trapped in the back stall, his halter caught on a nail. Jackson fought his way through smoke and heat, his eyes streaming, his lungs burning. He reached Ranger and yanked the halter free, but as he turned to lead the horse out, a figure stepped into the barn entrance. Silhouetted by flames, tall and broad, a gun in his hand. "Should have minded your own business," the man said. His voice had a slight drawl, southern or western. Not Marcus, one of his companions. Jackson did not hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot went wide, intentionally so. Jackson had no desire to kill anyone if it could be avoided. But the man dove for cover, giving Jackson the seconds he needed to vault onto Ranger's back and drive the panicked horse toward the entrance. They burst from the barn at a gallop, flames licking at Ranger's tail. The man who had confronted Jackson was rising from behind a water trough, bringing his gun up for another shot. Jackson leaned low over Ranger's neck as bullets whined past. They made it to the corral fence and Jackson threw himself off, rolling as he hit the ground, coming up behind the fence rails with his rifle ready. But the shooter had not followed. Instead, the man limped back toward the tree line, one leg dragging. Jackson's shot had not been as wild as he thought. He must have clipped the man's thigh or calf, one down, at least temporarily. But that left Marcus and at least one other. The barn was a total loss now, flames reaching 50 feet into the sky, lighting the entire ranch yard like day. Jackson used the light to his advantage, scanning for threats, looking for any movement that did not belong. There, near the well, a figure moving low and fast, using the smoke as cover, heading for the cabin's back door. Jackson ran, not toward the cabin but toward the figure, angling to intercept. He could not let anyone get inside, could not let them get to the cellar, to Sarah and Lily. He covered the distance in seconds, his body moving on pure adrenaline, no thought, just action. The figure heard him coming, spun, raised a revolver. Jackson hit him low and hard, a tackle that would have made his old rugby teammates proud, if he had ever played rugby, if this was a game and not a fight for lives that mattered. They went down in a tangle of limbs. The gun went skittering across frozen ground. They rolled, fighting for position, trading wild blows. The man was strong, well-trained, probably the one Sarah had called Wyatt. He got an arm around Jackson's throat, squeezing, cutting off air. Jackson drove an elbow back, connected with ribs, felt something give. The grip loosened enough for him to twist free. He scrambled away, found a piece of lumber from the woodpile, swung it like a club. It connected with Wyatt's shoulder, then his head. The man dropped, not unconscious but dazed enough that Jackson could grab the fallen revolver and back away, both weapons trained on the groaning figure. "Stay down," Jackson gasped. "Stay down or I will shoot you." Wyatt stayed down, two down. But where was Marcus? The answer came from behind him, a voice he recognized from Sarah's descriptions, cold and controlled despite the chaos. "Drop the guns, Mr. Ashford. Drop them or I put a bullet in your spine." Jackson froze. He could feel the rifle barrel pressed against his back, right between his shoulder blades. Marcus had circled around, used the fight with Wyatt as a distraction, come in from the blind side. Slowly, Jackson lowered both weapons to the ground. "Smart man," Marcus said. "Now step away from them. Hands where I can see them." Jackson complied, his mind racing. He was disarmed, outmaneuvered, at Marcus's mercy, but at least the man was focused on him and not on finding the cellar. "You've caused me a lot of trouble," Marcus continued, his voice conversational despite the rifle in his hands. "Hiding my family, filing papers to steal my land, turning my wife against me. Your wife ran from you because you beat her, because you killed her first child. Accidents happen. She knew the risks of defying me. That's not how marriage works." Marcus laughed, bitter and harsh. "What would you know about marriage? About what it takes to keep a family together? Sarah was mine. She swore vows. Those vows don't end just because she gets scared or confused. They end when you raise your hand to her. A man has a right to discipline his wife, to keep order in his home. The law agrees with me, Mr. Ashford. I checked. She's still legally my wife. Lily is legally my daughter. Whatever little fantasy you've built here, whatever hero you think you are, it doesn't change the law. Jackson was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're right, the law is on your side, but law and justice aren't always the same thing. Philosophy won't save you, friend. Where are they? Where's Sarah and Lily?" "Gone. I sent them away when I saw you coming. They're halfway to the next town by now." Marcus pressed the rifle harder against Jackson's back. "I don't believe you. Your horses are all accounted for, running loose. Nobody left here on horseback. So they're here, hiding. And you're going to tell me where?" "No, I'm not." "Then I'll burn the cabin like I burned the barn. Smoke them out." "Go ahead. They're not in there." Marcus hesitated. Jackson could feel the uncertainty, the calculation. Was he bluffing? How much time did Marcus want to waste searching? The moment of hesitation saved Jackson's life. A shot rang out from the direction of the cabin. Not from inside, but from the roof. The bullet took Marcus in the left shoulder, spinning him around, his rifle discharging into the air as his fingers spasmed on the trigger. Jackson did not waste the opportunity. He dove for his fallen weapons, rolled, came up with the rifle in his hands. But Marcus was already running, clutching his wounded shoulder, disappearing into the smoke and darkness toward the tree line where they had left their horses. Jackson could have shot him, had a clear line of fire for at least 3 seconds, but he lowered the rifle. He was not a killer. Not yet. Not if he could help it. Instead, he looked toward the cabin roof where a figure was silhouetted against the firelight. Sarah. She held old Pete's long rifle, the one Jackson had not even known she could fire, steadying it against the chimney. Their eyes met across the distance. She nodded once, then disappeared back through the window she had climbed from. Jackson turned his attention to Wyatt, still groaning on the ground. He bound the man's hands with rope from his belt, then checked on the other one, the limping shooter from the barn. That man was nowhere to be seen, must have retreated with Marcus. By the time Jackson reached the cabin, Sarah was already emerging from the bedroom, Lily in her arms. The child was crying, frightened by the noise and chaos. Sarah looked shaken but determined. "Is it over?" she asked. "For now. Marcus is wounded. His men are down or scattered. They'll regroup, but not tonight." "I shot him." Sarah's voice was hollow. "I actually shot another human being." "You saved my life." "I aimed for his chest. I missed." "You were shooting from a roof in the dark at a moving target. Missing was probably inevitable, but you hit him, and that's what mattered." Sarah sat heavily in the rocking chair, still holding Lily. "What happens now?" Jackson looked out the window at the burning barn, at the scattered horses, at the evidence of violence that stained his property. "Now we wait for the sheriff, and we make sure that when Marcus comes back, if he comes back, we're ready." Sheriff Garrett arrived at first light with 2 deputies and old Pete, who had seen the fire from his ranch and ridden to investigate. They found Jackson, Sarah, and Lily huddled in the cabin, exhausted but alive. The barn was a smoking ruin, the livestock scattered but mostly accounted for, and Wyatt Cole, bound and semi-conscious, lying where Jackson had left him. Garrett surveyed the scene with the weary eyes of a man who had seen too much violence in his years as a lawman. He knelt beside Wyatt, checked his injuries, then looked up at Jackson. "He going to live?" "Probably. Concussion, maybe some broken ribs. Nothing fatal." "Good. Make the trial simpler." Garrett stood and brushed snow from his knees. "You want to tell me what happened in here?" Jackson told him, the perimeter alarm, the barn fire, the fights with Wyatt and the other man. Marcus holding him at gunpoint, Sarah's shot that wounded Marcus and saved his life. Garrett listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small leather book. When Jackson finished, the sheriff turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Mitchell, you discharged a firearm at your husband. That's assault, technically. You understand that?" Sarah's face went pale. "I was protecting Jack. Marcus would have killed him." "I believe you, but the law is the law. I have to note it in my report." He paused. "Of course, law also says a person has a right to defend their property and the people on it from armed intruders. And Mr. Ashford's property was definitely being attacked by armed men. So I reckon we could call it justified defense." You're not going to arrest her? Jackson asked. For defending her home from a man who beat her and left her to die? No, Mr. Ashford, I'm not. But I am going to arrest Marcus Bennett and his associates if I can find them. Arson, assault, attempted murder, that's enough charges to hang a man 3 times over. He gestured to his deputies. Get Cole on a horse and take him to the jail, then start tracking Bennett. He's wounded, bleeding, moving slow. Can't have gotten far. As the deputies moved to comply, Garrett pulled Jackson aside. You got lucky last night. I know. But luck runs out. Bennett's still out there. He's wounded, humiliated, and now wanted by the law. That makes him more dangerous, not less. A desperate man with nothing to lose is the worst kind of enemy. What do you suggest? Keep your guard up. Don't leave Mrs. Mitchell and the child alone. And if Bennett shows his face again, don't hesitate like you did last night. I saw the tracks. You had a clear shot and didn't take it. I'm not a killer, Sheriff. Maybe not, but Bennett is. Remember that. The sheriff and his men rode out, taking Wyatt Cole with them. Old Pete stayed behind, helping Jackson round up the scattered horses and assess the damage. Going to need a new barn, Pete observed, surveying the charred remains. I can help with that come spring, if you want. I appreciate it. That little lady, Mrs. Mitchell, she's got sand, shooting from the roof like that. Not many women would have the nerve. Jackson smiled slightly. She's remarkable. You sweet on her? The question caught Jackson off guard. I'm helping her. That's all. Uh-huh. You keep telling yourself that. Pete clapped him on the shoulder. Just be careful, Jack. Man starts caring about things again after years of not caring. It makes him vulnerable. Makes him take risks he wouldn't normally take. Is that advice or a warning? Both. Pete left before noon, promising to return in a few days with supplies and lumber for rebuilding. Jackson watched him go, then turned back to the cabin where Sarah and Lily waited. They had survived the night, but the cost was visible in Sarah's hollow eyes, in the way Lily clung to her mother and refused to let go, in the burned wreckage that marked Jackson's property like a scar. This was far from over. Marcus Bennett sat in a cave 10 miles north of the Ashford Ranch, his wounded shoulder packed with snow and wrapped in strips torn from his shirt. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped. He needed real medical attention, needed a doctor and proper bandaging and probably stitches. But going to a doctor meant questions. Questions meant the sheriff finding out where he was. And the sheriff meant arrest, trial, hanging probably for what he had done last night. So he sat in the cold and pressed snow against his wound and tried to figure out what to do next. Frank, the limping shooter from the barn, had disappeared, probably headed for the nearest town with a doctor, probably already in custody by now or close to it. Wyatt was captured. Marcus had watched from the tree line as the deputies hauled his old friend away. He was alone, wounded, wanted, with no plan and no resources beyond his rifle and the clothes on his back. But he still had purpose. Sarah and Lily were at the Ashford Ranch, close enough to reach, close enough to take back if he was smart about it. The question was whether he should. For the first time in 2 years of hunting his family, Marcus allowed himself to really think about why. Not the surface reasons, the easy answers about marriage vows and parental rights, but the deeper truth he had been avoiding. He did not want Sarah back because he loved her. He was not sure he even knew what love meant anymore. Not after the war, not after the things he had seen and done. What he wanted was control, possession, the proof that he could hold on to something, that not everything in his life slipped away into blood and chaos and regret. Sarah had left him because he had hurt her, had killed their first child through violence and rage. Those were facts he could not deny, even to himself. And Lily barely knew him, would not remember him as anything but the angry man who made Mommy cry. If he took them back now, by force, what would he have? A wife who hated him, a daughter who feared him, a life built on violence and imprisonment. Was that worth dying for? Worth killing for? Marcus pressed harder against his wound, using the pain to think clearly, to cut through the rage and obsession that had driven him for so long. The truth, when he finally admitted it, tasted like ashes. He had already lost them. Had lost them the moment he raised his hand to Sarah. Every choice since then had just been delaying the acceptance of that loss, pretending that determination could undo consequences, that wanting something badly enough made it rightfully his. But it did not work that way. Reality did not bend to Will, no matter how strong. And Sarah and Lily were not objects to be possessed. They were people with their own will, their own choices. And they had chosen to leave him. They had chosen Jackson Ashford, a man who protected instead of hurting, who gave instead of taking. Marcus sat in the cave as the sun climbed higher, bringing no warmth to the frozen landscape. He thought about his options. He could go back. Try again. Maybe succeed through stealth or luck. Take them at gunpoint. Force them into hiding somewhere remote where Sarah could never escape again. Or he could let go. It seemed impossible. Like cutting off his own arm. Like admitting that everything he had done for 2 years, all the searching and planning and violence, had been for nothing. But perhaps it was not for nothing if it ended here. If he learned this one lesson, accepted this one truth, that love could not be forced, that family was not possession, that some things once broken could not be mended by will alone. Marcus stood slowly, testing his strength. The bleeding had stopped, though the wound still throbbed with each heartbeat. He had enough strength to travel, to disappear into the territories where the law was thin and a man could start over if he had the courage to truly start fresh. He took one last look south, toward the Ashford Ranch where his daughter was learning to live without him. It hurt more than the bullet wound, but it was the right kind of hurt, the kind that meant something was healing instead of festering. "Be safe, Lily," he whispered to the wind. "Be happy. Be everything I wasn't." Then Marcus Bennett turned north and walked away from his family for the last time, choosing release over obsession, surrender over continued violence. It was the first truly unselfish thing he had done in years. The weeks that followed were a period of slow recovery and careful rebuilding. The sheriff's men tracked Marcus as far as the territorial border, then lost his trail in a river crossing. Wanted posters went out to surrounding territories. Marcus Bennett was a fugitive now, unable to return to Wyoming without facing arrest. But he did not return. Days passed, then weeks, with no sign of him. It seemed, against all odds, that he had given up, that Sarah and Lily were finally, truly free. The legal papers came through. The land transfer to Sarah was finalized, giving her 800 acres of property in her own name. Jackson's lawyers in Boston found grounds for divorce under Texas law based on abandonment and cruelty. The paperwork was filed. In 6 months, Sarah would legally be free of Marcus Bennett forever. Money arrived from Jackson's bank accounts, $5,000 deposited in Sarah's name. Enough to rebuild, to start over, to have security for the first time in her adult life. But more important than legal freedom or financial security was the healing that happened in quieter ways. Lily began to laugh again. Really laugh, not the nervous, careful laughter of a child walking on eggshells, but the uninhibited joy of someone who felt safe. She helped Jackson with chores, learned to gather eggs without breaking them, to brush horses properly, to read simple words from the books he shared with her. Sarah grew stronger. Her physical injuries healed, the bruises fading from purple to yellow to nothing. But the deeper injuries, the ones that lived in her mind and heart, those took longer. She still woke sometimes from nightmares, gasping Marcus's name, still flinched at unexpected sounds or movements. But gradually, over meals shared and work done together and quiet evenings by the fire, she learned that not all men were like Marcus. That strength could exist without cruelty. That protection did not require possession. And Jackson, who had come to Wyoming to die slowly of guilt and isolation, found himself learning to live again. Found purpose in teaching Lily her letters, in discussing literature with Sarah, in rebuilding the barn with old Pete's help. Found that grief did not disappear but could coexist with new joy. That loving Emma and Grace did not preclude caring for Sarah and Lily. One evening in early spring, when the snow had begun to melt and the first green shoots were appearing in the garden, Jackson and Sarah sat on the porch while Lily played in the yard with Rosie. "Jack," Sarah said quietly, "I've been thinking about the future, about what happens now." "What do you mean?" "You've given us so much. Land, money, protection. But we can't stay here forever, depending on your generosity. We need to find our own way." Jackson was quiet for a long moment. "What if I don't want you to leave?" Sarah turned to look at him, surprise in her eyes. What? These past weeks, having you and Lily here, it's been the first time in 4 years that this place has felt like a home instead of a prison. The first time I've woken up looking forward to the day instead of dreading it. Jack, we're grateful, but I'm not asking for gratitude. I'm asking, when the divorce is final, when you're legally free, would you consider staying? Not as my housekeeper or employee, as my partner, my family. Sarah's breath caught. Are you proposing? Not yet. Not while you're still legally married, still vulnerable. But I'm asking if you'd be willing to consider it when the time is right, when you're ready. Sarah looked out at Lily, running through the melting snow, laughing at nothing and everything. I never thought I'd trust a man again. Never thought I'd want to. And now? Now I think maybe trust can be rebuilt. Maybe not the naive trust I had at 17, but something stronger, something earned. She turned back to Jackson. Ask me again when the divorce is final. Ask me properly, and I'll give you my answer. Jackson smiled, feeling something he had not felt in years. Not just hope, but certainty. That this was right. That this strange family built from tragedy and chance was exactly what all of them needed. I'll ask, he promised. And Sarah, I already know your answer. Do you? Yes, because you wouldn't be sitting here talking about the future if you hadn't already decided to have one. With us. With me. Sarah laughed, soft and genuine. You're very sure of yourself, Mr. Ashford. I'm sure of you, Mrs. Mitchell. That's different. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Lily play, watching the sun set over the mountains, watching the world transform from winter to spring. And in that moment, everything felt possible. Return to Boston, 1920. In the law office in Boston, the old man finished his story. His grandchildren sat silent, processing everything they had heard. The journey from despair to hope, the violence and danger, the love that grew from unlikely circumstances. James spoke first. So you married her, grandmother Sarah. 6 months later, when the divorce was final, small ceremony, old Pete officiated since he was also a justice of the peace. Lily was flower girl, insisted on wearing her best dress and carrying Rosie. And Marcus? Emma Grace asked. What happened to him? Jackson shook his head. We never saw him again. Heard rumors over the years. That he died in the territories. That he joined the army again under a different name. That he became a prospector in Alaska. I don't know which, if any, are true. But he never came back. Never contacted Sarah or Lily again. That must have been hard, Daniel said. For Lily especially. Growing up without knowing what happened to her father. It was. But Sarah and I made sure Lily knew the truth. That Marcus was sick, that he had done terrible things, but that somewhere inside him was a man who wanted to be better and couldn't figure out how. We didn't lie to her, but we didn't make her hate him either. That's remarkably compassionate, James observed. It was necessary. Hate poisons the hater more than the hated. We wanted Lily to be free of that, and she was. And Jackson stood and walked to the window again, looking out at the city he had left so many years ago. Lily is your aunt. She's 37 now, runs Haven Ranch better than I ever did. Over the years, we expanded it, built more buildings, started taking in women fleeing violence, giving them land and resources to start over. Helped over 2,000 women and children in the past 30 years. That's the condition of your inheritance, he continued. One of you must go to Haven Ranch. Live there for a year, learn from Lily, understand what this family stands for. The 3 grandchildren looked at each other. Then Emma Grace stood. I'll go. I want to learn. I want to continue this. Daniel stood as well. We'll all go, together. James nodded. As a family, the way you and grandmother Sarah taught us. Jackson smiled, tears in his eyes. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Your grandmother would be so proud. He walked to his desk and pulled out 3 train tickets. I bought these a month ago. I knew you'd choose right. The train leaves tomorrow for Wyoming. Lily is expecting you. But grandfather, Emma Grace said, what about you? You're not coming? The old man shook his head. I've made this journey once, 40 years ago, running from guilt. I don't need to make it again. My time is ending, children. But yours is just beginning. We'd like you there. and I'll be there in spirit. But Haven Ranch belongs to the next generation now. To you and to everyone who comes after you who chooses to continue this work. He embraced each of them in turn. Remember what I've taught you. That wealth without purpose is meaningless. That family is built by choice as much as blood. That redemption is always possible if you're willing to do the hard work of being better than you were. 8 months later, in late autumn of 1920, Jackson Ashford III died peacefully in his sleep in the Boston townhouse. His funeral was attended by hundreds, including 36 women who had stayed at Haven Ranch over the years, who traveled across the country to pay respects to the man who had saved them. He was buried in Wyoming, next to Sarah, on a hill overlooking the ranch. The headstone was simple: Jackson Ashford III, 1852 to 1920, railroad heir who found true wealth in love and legacy. And below it, Sarah Mitchell Ashford, 1858-1916, beloved wife, mother, healer. She taught women to rise. On the day of his burial, Lily Rose Ashford stood between her half-siblings, the children Sarah and Jackson had together, and spoke to the gathered crowd. My father, Jackson Ashford, spent the first half of his life building wealth and the second half learning what wealth really means. He taught me that family is not who you're born to, but who chooses to stay. That courage is not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. That we all deserve second chances if we're brave enough to take them. Haven Ranch existed because a little girl knocked on a door during a blizzard and a broken man answered. Because my mother had the courage to run and my father had the courage to protect. Because they chose each other, chose us, chose to build something that would outlast them. This ranch, this legacy, it's not just buildings and land. It's the promise that safety exists, that help is available, that no one has to face violence alone. She looked at her nieces and nephews, at James and Emma Grace and Daniel standing respectfully at the back of the crowd. The next generation is here now, and I know they'll carry this forward, because that's what family does. We carry each other. We protect each other. We love each other. That's the lesson my parents taught me, and it's the lesson I'll teach anyone who asks. As the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, casting golden light across the ranch where so many had found refuge, the gathered crowd sang a hymn. Simple words about grace and redemption and love that conquers fear. And in that moment, Jackson's journey was complete. From guilt to purpose, from isolation to family, from death to life, lived fully and well. The snowbound promise, made on the coldest night, had been kept and would be kept by generations to come.